Gaurav, the participants can access the chat room, right?
Yes, Bhavik, the participants can access the chat. And yeah, we are on time and we'll start. So yeah, so all the participants, I want to know if you can hear me loud and clear, right? VIC or yes in the chat if you can hear me loud and clear. If my voice is clear, great, perfect. So before beginning today's session, right, I want to know how many of you were present in the previous two sessions, the one we had on 25th and the one we had on 27th. Did you get a chance to be present at the sessions, and did you like those sessions, right? And even if you weren't present live, did you check out the recordings of the session? Great, perfect. So we have all the yeses flowing in. And today we have the concluding session for PM at Scale Bootcamp, right? And today's topic is very interesting, right? The good, bad, and the ugly sides of being a product manager, right? So as Uncle Ben said to Peter that with great power comes great responsibility, but no one said that with great responsibility comes great stress, right? So that is something that no one told us. So that is what the speaker for today, Mr. Bhavik Gattani, will be talking about, right? Now, before handing over all of you to Mr. Bhavik, I will give a quick introduction about him. So he was a product manager at Uber, and he has recently moved to Adobe as a product manager. Congratulations, Bhavik. And Bhavik was working in a customer obsessed team at Uber. He specializes in building products from 0 to 1, right? And his expertise spanned across mobility, food delivery, expanding new verticals. And today, Bhavik will be talking about what are the good, bad, and the ugly sides of being a product manager. So it's all yours, Bhavik. The stage is yours. And thank you so much for being here and taking this session.
Okay, great. So, can I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, your screen is visible. Yep.
Let me bring up the chat room also in case there's something. Hey, hi folks. Thanks Gaurav for the introduction. I'm going to talk about like the good, bad, and ugly sides of being a product manager. It's not always as shiny as it seems from outside. And I just wanted to share some insights I've had working as a product manager or working on launching some of the digital products out there. What I'll do is I'll largely break down the whole session into 4 parts. Why I picked this topic, what like is expected from good product managers, and how do you navigate in certain difficult scenarios. You as a product manager, you might face a lot of them, and then we can keep like the last part of the session for more questions. I have about like 5 or 6 slides. So I'm like the overall talk time might not be more than 25-30 minutes from my side. Let's make sure we keep this interactive. If you have anything that you want to ask in between, feel free to stop me or put something in the Zoom chat, and I can try to answer those questions there. This in no way is like a monologue on my side. I'm going to talk about only things that I know. These are more reflections of my experience with a bunch of things that I have read out on some of the blogs, some of the podcasts, and those things. So not everything that I'm going to present is what like is proprietary or in any way. Like I know a lot of things are also things you might find on internet. It's just a more synthesized version of like both those things together. So moving on, like kicking this off, why this topic? And something very recently happened, which was very interesting. Somebody shared a meme with me on Instagram, which said that becoming a product manager today is like becoming a guitarist probably like 10 years back. And of course, it's a cool job sort of to have, and that's also because a lot of products are moving to the digital world today. If the consumer economy is so strong that just having a, a good brand name is not enough. There is enough competition, there is disruption all along the way, which means you need to be on your toes, and your product speaks a lot more than anything else. So while that happens, there is also a lot that rides on you when you are doing things as a product manager. Think of it like a scenario when, say, if you had a recipe book, and you wrote a recipe and you gave it to somebody, and that person prepared the food. Now, uh, the food that came out is what your responsibility is, whereas what you did was pretty much about like just building out the recipe. And as you work in a product management career, a lot of times what you do is end up writing like the strategy, the PRD document on how you are going to do certain things. But you got to work with a bunch of folks on the design side, on the engineering side, business stakeholders, and everyone out there, right? So in those scenarios, when you are faced with those situations, what do you do, and how do you handle those situations? Is what I'm going to talk about next. So these are like a few things. Anybody who's like who's been a PM or has worked in any of the tech orgs has faced these problems. Anything that you think is relatable has happened, if you can like write in your chat room. Are these anytime the problems you've seen? Maybe a yes, no, or which one you've experienced? You want to talk about? Shrikant says yes. Which one, Shrikant, is the most relatable to you? The first one, not having enough funding. Second one, engineering manager doesn't understand it. Okay, so I'm hearing a bunch of things here. Let me be honest. These are not like great signs of a great product manager. These are not great signs of a great product team. And the reason is like these are situations which are expected to be out there as you work through. There will always be a funding crunch, because you might end up doing thinking about things that you can do, but with technology, a lot of times what happens is you front load the effort, which means if you built out a particular feature, that feature gets to stay. And therefore it's important that if you face these scenarios, and I've been confronted with these scenarios a lot more often than I can imagine. But the fact is, these are like problems that will happen irrespective of how much time you've spent as a product manager. And what I then offer is like how do you break down some of these problems. So generally, if there is not enough funding, like, and this might not be everything that I can put out in terms of what solutions can be. So these are things probably in ways you can think about these problems, but there might be other ways you can still solve the similar problem. If there is a general funding crunch, which is almost always there, what I go back to doing is decomposing the problem. So if I had like a Taj Mahal in my head that I had to like build out, how would I start building it? What would be like the first part of that product that I want to build out that can be shipped to the customer? That's extremely important that you keep iterating work in an agile format, and keep shipping out, because unless you're shipping out, you might not even realize what you built, and you might end up spending like time 6 months building out something, and at the end you realize either the market has moved or your understanding of the problem was entirely incorrect. So I would strongly recommend in those scenarios breaking down the problem, focusing on what gets you more revenue, what's more critical for your customers out there. And a lot of times, like, what happens is you are not happy about the design of the toaster, the color of the model, etc. Think about those things, whether they make like a real difference in the world immediately, or those are things that need to happen in the long term. So focus on like breaking down the problem and focusing on what's most important for your customers at that point in time. Engineering manager doesn't get it. I think a lot depends on how product managers present the problem. engineering teams like I have worked with have been like the best engineering teams and the most fantastic engineers I've gotten to work with. What I alluded to doing over a period of time is understand that if you define the what crisply, your job is half done. And what you don't need to do after that is spend time on being a part of the sprint and get the delivery out. You need to manage the delivery of the what. You don't need to get involved into managing the finer parts of delivery. That's the job of the engineering manager. If you can bring them on board with the problem statement, if they understand what the pain point of the customer is, more often than not, you'd see them coming up with something which is an extremely innovative solution that can be put out there in a much shorter period of time. Already overworked, this does happen to a lot of folks. I've worked with and I've spent time with. What I tend to do is practice discipline, which is only do meetings that you think need to be a meeting. If something can be just an email, just let that be an email. Try focusing on what do you get at the end of every sprint, which is, are you building out something in 2 weeks or whatever that sprint cycle is what you run with, and at the end of the sprint, have you built out something that can be shipped to the customer? And if you've done that, prepare a status report about it and just send it. A lot of times what also happens is you end up duplicating, updating status report at a bunch of other places. Again, having your own sort of status report maintained will help you keep like the same verbatim being managed across different places where you might have to update the same thing. So that way you save your time and you save everybody else's time as well. Competition has 10x engineers. It's the engineering space is extremely hot right now. It's difficult to hire engineers across the board, but generally the technology problems are not problems that require more headcount. They require a deeper thinking at a customer level. So if you've defined what a good product is and if you're executing strongly, that should largely be enough, and you might not really need 10x engineers. A lot of time what typically I've seen happen a lot in the startup space is competition launches X, and then the other competitor just goes, looks at that X feature and blindly follows and launches it. The problem with that is maybe the original person launching it had not thought about it so deeply, and now you've also launched the same feature, and either of the feature is not helpful for your customers. So make sure you understand why you are building out something and what's the customer impact of what you're going to build out, and that will help you keep the delivery crisp and short. And that probably can solve the first problem also a lot of times. I don't get enough directions. I think the best way I have been able to deal with this is accepting that I don't know it all. It's going to be like a lot more common that you are put out a question about your product itself, but the product in itself is so huge and complex that you might not know all the answers. So it's okay, number one, to be not knowing a particular thing. And if you don't know it, then how do you go about is asking the right questions, and working with your teams very closely to understand, again, the customer side of it. Why is it important? What would change in the life cycle of the customer? And those questions will typically help you answer those things. So that's largely how would you differentiate between like a good product manager versus like product managers generally struggling, and practicing these are much harder than said. So I go back to like my notes on thinking about these problems when I face these a lot, and that helps me. Next, I'm going to talk about 3 things, more coming from stories of what I've felt, and some nuggets around how can you navigate as a product manager. If there are questions, please feel free to put that like in the Zoom chat, and we can answer them along the way. But starting off, when you start working on a product, it is almost always true that that it gets ingrained in your system. It will so much sometimes be true that if the product is performing not so well, you would start feeling extremely low. And if the product starts performing well, even if you are unwell that day, you start getting those highs, and that becomes like your drug of sorts to be excited about. Uh, it's even common for sometimes for some people to be in a place where they start feeling physically ill if the product is not doing great. And even if you don't know what's not great, but you as a product manager, a lot of times you know that the feeling there that you have that something is not working is true. Unfortunately, the feeling of this not being great is the easy part of the job. The hard part of the job is you knowing which way do you run, how do you deal with this dreaded situation. Do you run towards your fears, or do you run away from them? Say you've launched a new product, it's doing great in terms of aggregate numbers, adoption is good, the costs that you wanted to bring down are coming down, but in your gut you know you can feel the issues. The product is not scalable, the quality isn't great, the performance is not as what you expected. And if that happens, then what do? Do you start making noise? Do you start already celebrating and raise expectations about the product, or do you go back to the drawing board and focus on the problems that can start coming in as a part of the scalability? I see somebody raised a hand. Is there a question there? Okay. Namrata raised a hand. Okay, fine. I'll keep going in that case. Okay. All great. All good. All good. Okay. So these things happen, and you feel it, but the only truth lies is running towards those fears. If those situations happen, work towards them. Start solving them, because if you don't, you are most definitely going to have a very bad hangover, maybe a few weeks down the line or a few months down the line. Your tech debt is going to go up, the bug counts are going to go up, and if that happens, you are pretty much not in a very good place in the first thing. And if that happens, you know it's like karma coming back to you. So it's important to run towards those problems right from the beginning when you started feeling them, rather than just ignoring them. The next one. Um, so some time ago, it happened that me and the data scientists on the team, we were working on creating a model to reduce the overall support spend. And what ended up happening is the model that we saw was just a draft in which the support spend was reduced because we reduced the number of headcount. And I was super frustrated at that point in time, because what I said was that the spreadsheet is not the product. My frustration came from a few things, like um, there are so many things that can be done. You can reduce the cost per hour. You can try to have a better footprint strategy. You could have a more comprehensive training. You can try to reduce the reopen rates. But all of that was not there. It was just like the map is not the terrain, right? The spreadsheet is not the product. What I learned the hard way is you cannot run around the terrain without knowing the map and expect yourself to go anywhere at a good place. As a product manager, you would see like this happen a lot more times. You would get thrown a lot of questions around product market fit until you find it. And we can have like a separate discussion entirely around what product market fit is, and when do you and how do you achieve it. Do you even know if you've achieved it? But say until you've not achieved it and you grow, the business keeps becoming more and more complex. And one advice that I have is try creating an analytical twin of your product, which means the analytical twin is what is going to be your map it's the key matrix, which are both input and output in its nature. And once you have that set up, what ends up happening is you having a very clear understanding of the map. And once you have the understanding of the map, you can pretty much try to build a terrain out of it. In well-run tech teams, the product manager, I would assume, will own the terrain, whereas like the data science teams usually try to own the map. But what's also important is that both of them know the other job pretty well. So for example, the PM must know what other levers they have if what they planned did not go well, and how they can still try to pull off the end year goal. And similarly, if the data science team is also deeply involved into the execution, what they could give is constantly insights into what might be working for some reason and what might not be working. I see there is a question, how to prioritize new feature that gets new user segment, which increases revenue, or improving tech stack on old product to avoid scalability issues. What would be the right thing to do? Oh, so this one is quite common actually, Namrata. So this does happen a lot of times, that that either the design, the engineering, or the product teams don't feel this is the right way to do things. But the question here you should ask yourself is whether the changes you are going to make are going to have any significant customer impact. And you should compare the two things: building out new features versus updating the stack. And generally updating the stack, etc., are like long-term problems which bring in scalability and other issues. But if you end up choosing the side of solving for the long term and solving for the outdated stack, etc., then make sure while you're doing that, you also roll in a bunch of new features, as many as you can, because just rewriting the code, in my experience, I haven't seen a lot change. It probably can improve performance, which means, say, the load time gets better by a few seconds, but practically the customers a lot of times don't even realize. So if you are building out something, you probably, it's better to also roll it out with a bunch of other things. The other incentive of rolling it out with a few other problems that you solve on the new tech stack is it's the adoption gets easier, because you have now new feature in the new version. The switching between old versus new version becomes easier of a decision, both internally and externally. So the customers have an incentive to move towards it. The business has an incentive to put in work or resources towards making that change. And hence I would put a balance between the two versus just choosing one or the other. I don't know if that answered your question, but you also said you can't unmute. Let me know in the chat room in that case, if there's something more you want me to answer. Great. All right. The final one that I have is this one. So I'm going to play this video out for you guys.
I am not a role model.
Can you hear the audio?
Yes, Bhavik, the audio is audible. Yeah.
Okay.
I am not a role model. I'm not paid to be a role model. I'm paid to wreak havoc on the basketball court. Parents should be role models. Just because I dunk a basketball doesn't mean I should raise your kids.
I don't know if the audio was super clear, but this is like a video from 1993 where somebody asked Charles Barkley if he's a role model. And he said it point blank, I'm not a role model. And then what happened was a few time later, somebody asked Hakeem, one of Charles' teammate, whether he's a role model. And Hakeem said, yes, I am a role model. And then a little later in the interview, what you ended up realizing, Hakeem explaining that Charles had a very different personality personally and professionally. Whereas Hakeem had the exact same personality both personally as well as professionally. If you have two different personalities in your professional version and your personal version, the problem is over a period of time it's going to be getting harder for you to maintain those two different personalities. You would either end up impacting your personal decisions, personal life, or you might end up stressing yourself too much, which at the end means you might not like yourself. So what to me Charles was essentially saying is, hey, I should not be a role model because I don't like myself in the way I am. Whereas in case of Hakeem's story, he was exactly what he was both personally and professionally. This one went to a level where Nike started creating an ad out of it, and that's what, like, that was a version where like Nike was on a roll. They were creating in that version more ads. I remember sometimes like Steve Jobs said something, and those things. But the bigger point is, as a PM, you get a lot of external inputs. Somebody might come up to you and say we should do this because this stakeholder is very important and they think you should do it. You attend another team's sprint meeting, what you realize is, hey, they are doing the sprint meeting in a certain way, their Jira board is set up in a certain way, and this is so cool. I think we should do it too. Somebody might just come in and say that, hey, this person on your team is not great, you should change your designer or something like that. But those are like all external inputs. It's important as a product manager to know your team and be comfortable with the strengths as well as the like the weaknesses of your team. So what you should know in the case of when somebody said like we should do this because the external teams think we should do this, you should still ask yourself whether your customers need it. And as a PM, your job is to make, like, that's the most important job I would say I've realized is, in the team you have great designers, in the team you have great engineers, and even if you won't have a PM, you might end up building something. But the role the PM plays in a product team is the representation of a customer. So if you are on that team, think if the customer was there, what would their input be? And while you're doing that, while you are being the representation, while you're representing the customer, what you should make sure is you are being yourself and you are letting your team being themselves. So if you don't do that, either people start accepting things on the face value without questioning them too much, or they even stop thinking sometimes on what needs to happen. They might just think that, hey, my job is to write the code, I'll probably just give out the code and see what happens. But whereas if you let those free flow of ideas happen, it gets the product gets a lot more matured. You tend to come out with something which is great. You think about the problems a lot more deeply. You just don't blindly copy paste something. If you end up copy pasting blindly in more often than not scenarios, I have seen what happen is you reach somewhere in between, and while you are there, you get exposed to certain questions that even you don't have an answer for. And it's okay to not have answers for, but if you don't have an answer for because you just blindly copied a feature or blindly followed a process that the other team was doing, that one is riding on you. So do things that you think are right, do things in the way you think they're right. A word of caution there, if you do this, like, not everybody might like you, but to me, choosing between what's important for the customer uh, versus everybody liking you, it's a lot more important that you represent the customer and you get things rolled out in a way that that matters to them more. And if you can manage to do that while being yourself, while being very honest about what you feel about certain decisions with your team, those are like scenarios that lead to a better product. And in the end, when you get to the other side of it, everybody will be a lot more relieved, a lot more excited about what you build, and the product will be, because the product is better, because the product solves a problem, and not just because you did something without understanding those things. So yeah, that was the last one that I had in terms of nuggets that I want to share. I think there are a few hands, some questions I see. How do you manage an eng manager or team who are not accepting the ideas and always look to the negative side of every idea? I think if that happens, it's more of a communication problem to me, because generally I start with assuming good intent, which means everybody wants to solve the problem. And if that's true, then as a PM, it's your job to make sure you crisply define the problem. You go back to them, you tend to explain them so much sometimes that you open the app, you open the desktop, you open the website together and say, hey, if you were the customer, how would you feel if you were to go through this experience? And if that's extremely frustrating, then it's easier to bring them on board. It's always like not that easy. There are always downsides of doing something, but if the intentions are correct, more often than not you would end up getting a buy-in. And even if that's not enough, I think you should still ask the question around why not. I think a lot of time people end up in a cycle is asking the question of why. If it's a valid problem, then the follow-up question I typically tend to ask is, why do you think we should then not do this? Is there a better opportunity out there? And if it is out there, then you should be objective about dropping that idea, going back to a better idea. It's entirely okay to scrap something you've built in the last 6 weeks. Shouldn't not be super emotional about it. But if that does happen, I think it's more of a communication thing, making sure it is also their priority and not just your priority. I don't know, Shrikant, if that answers, if you have any other follow-ups on that one. Sushil has another one. How do you manage when for a B2B product, the customers who give considerable amount of revenue come up with ridiculous demands, like asking for something that won't add value? I mean, I won't be able to like answer this unless I really know what the example here is. But if the customers are asking that as a feature, one thing I tend to do is not ask them for solution. I ask them for the problem. And if you know and if you understand their frustration with it, you probably can get a solution which is somewhere in between, which is not absolutely nonsensical to build out. It's already probably a solved problem and out there somewhere else. But if your customers want it, you should know that you have to build it at some point in time. May not be exactly in the way the customer wants it to be built out, but it still has to solve the same problem. And how do you make sure you do that is where you as a PM come in. And that's why people often say the buck stops at the product manager. So if it stops at you, you should understand the frustration and try to solve it. Okay. The next one we have from Namrata is, what is the first and most important thing you live by as a product manager? Doing thing right or doing it fast? So generally, doing thing right and doing it fast are not mutually exclusive. As far as you can break down the problem to a level where you can ship something out, and if you understand like the percentage success, so if you know there's a more than 50% chance of getting a success, what I would do is maybe spend a couple of extra weeks to build it out in a way it can scale. But if I cannot honestly answer myself if this one is going to work or this is not going to work. I would rather fall back on doing a proof of concept, which means it's okay to not have something which is scalable at the beginning. But again, important to know honestly to yourself that it's not scalable, which means you set the expectations right up front with the other stakeholders, saying that if we do this and if it succeeds, we will need another gestation period to go back and write it in a way that it can start becoming scalable. So uh, depends again on where the company is, like as an organization, how matured you are. If you are a startup, I would say always fall back on doing it fast, because there might be like a lot more pivoting that is out there around to be done. But if you are in a stage where it's a lot more matured company, there is a significant adoption of the product already, then you don't want to piss off like your customers who've already been with your brand. They have a certain expectation of you, and if that's true, then it's important to build it out in a way that it's seamless. The next one that we have from Lata, and folks, if you think there are still follow-ups, feel free to keep dropping them on the chat, so I can take those ones. An influential stakeholder keeps saying the product team is very powerful, but he ends up interacting with the eng team directly and introduces his own user stories. How do we handle this situation? Yeah, this does happen, and it's not always a bad situation to be in, to be honest, Lata. If the two teams are talking directly, the problem I have seen happen as a result of not having a product input into it is you might just end up building a feature, you might not solve the problem. So um, this goes back to like how organizationally you are set up, and if the PM is rightly empowered in order to do things in the way it's expected. But assuming those things exist, there is a role you play. The product manager owns the product roadmap, which means if you think something doesn't make sense, you should absolutely scrap it, and you should be absolutely blunt about it to any stakeholder. And that's the part where I said that not everybody will end up liking you, but that's fine. To me, what's important is that the customers like the product more than everyone likes you. So if you can make a call between the two, you probably would be like in a place you can solve this. The next one from Harinder, if a Hippo advice comes to add a feature, how do you typically handle specifically for a B2B product? Hippo, I'm not 100% sure, but it's probably like Harinder, what you're referring to is a compliance requirement, and compliance requirements require a completely different lens. I get it that building out something just for the sake of regulators asking it sometimes not be the most exciting thing for the product managers to, but understand that in the ecosystem, the government, the regulators are also an equal stakeholder to the product. And if they exist for a reason, which is in a happy world, you might not even need regulations to exist. But the world is like not always is on a happy path, and hence regulations exist. So if your product is in a market where the regulation requirements are extremely stringent, and if that needs to be built out and that needs to be prioritized, even though the impact is smaller in absolute revenue terms, it's important for it to exist. So then you make a call between uh, uh, what the regulators ask you to do it, and why they ask you to do it. Of course, there are ways in ways you can engage with regulators more deeply and try to understand where their frustrations are coming from, because as I said, they're also a stakeholder to this. But yeah, hopefully like understanding the frustration will give you a better clarity of the solution, like of what you're going to build out. The next one from Lata, is it okay to have a dirty quick solution or always focus on having stable? It's absolutely okay to have dirty and quick solutions. It's probably better to have dirty and quick solutions and testing them out because if you end up building too much, I think there's a term that's often called out, which is called boiling the ocean. And if you end up boiling the ocean, what came out might not be something that people can even adopt. So quick and dirty solutions are always okay, depending upon, again, to my previous point, what's the stage of the company. I would say uh, set the right expectations. If it's a startup just doing like a pre-seed early stage world, still waiting for their revenue, customers, etc. to come in, it's okay to just send out something and get early feedback before you start building out things more maturely. But if it's a product which is already a brand and some certain things are expected out of you, make sure you set that expectation. And there are ways in which you can still control the customer experience. There is always experimentation available. There are like an ocean of tools out there just to do experimentation. And if you can roll out to say first 5% of your users and tend to get feedback, or maybe sometimes like at a large scale 1% of users is good enough to get that feedback, make sure you do that. And before you scale up, you still fixed the parts that you are not excited about. I think we talked about this in one of the slides where we said that you should run towards the problem and not away from it, which is if you know something is not working out or may break, just set the right expectations, and when the time comes, make sure you fix it in time. I think it's about failing fast for things. Okay. Sure. I'm currently a PM at a startup fintech in the commerce space. For background, we initially had issues with UX to the point I ended up figuring out Figma and doing most of the screens myself. So my question, now we realize that the numbers we are reporting are off, so I'm getting pulled in that direction. So my question then is, what is it like at a large company like Uber? How much of us do you end up doing? How much of UX do you end up doing? Do you ever need to use SQL to dive into data, build models, or end up stitching together data? Okay, got it. Yeah. Uh, mm, it depends again with team to team. Gavin, to your question, sometimes I mean, like there is always like I said, right, in terms of technology products, depending upon whichever stage they are, like early stage, slightly matured, more matured, there are always great ideas out there, because overall I don't think technology still influences more than 5% of the world, physical world there. So wherever you are, there is always a need to be better at a product level. And when you are doing that, there, as a product manager, you'll always have like a huge backlog of things you want to build out. And if you don't have, that's a very rare scenario, which is like for very watertight products. But I haven't seen a lot of them except for a few. But uh, in large companies, you do have a more matured setup, which is like you have a couple of designers, you have your engineering team set up, you have your business stakeholders, etc. in place. It did happen to me like a few times when we built out something just based on wireframe, because we were like I said, just doing a proof of concept of what we wanted to build out, and the team was overall running extremely busy with with the current roadmap, and we just wanted to test out a new idea, and we had some bandwidth on some side but did not have the design bandwidth. So uh, uh, if you are comfortable, you should write your SQL queries, it's okay. But you should spend a lot more time in setting, like as a product manager, your job is a lot more to think about what's going to be built out 6 months down the line, and not what's essentially going to be built out 2 weeks down the line. That should have been already figured out 6 months back, regardless of where you are. But in a startup, I do understand you need to wear multiple hats, and it's okay probably to like be doing those things. It's less of a product manager thing, it's more of like a startup thing, if that's there. It's paid person, sure. Is that hippo or hippo? No, it means high important paid person. See some dirty solutions are not sustainable. Yes, dirty solutions are not always sustainable, and that's why they are hacks. And as PM, I love hacks because it gives me a very early insight into what the world would be with a seamless solution. Otherwise, it's just imagination. So it's okay to just have some hacks sometimes out there, but you should know what the cost of it is, and if it's huge, you should cut down by just only exposing 1%. Or 5% to just get very early feedback. What are the challenges working in 0 to 1 companies and how do you manage them? Yeah, I mean, working on 0 to 1 is very different from working on 1 to 100. 0 to 1 is a lot more, in my mind. The difference is in between 0 to 1 and 1 to 100 is 0 to 1 is a lot more about figuring out the product market fit, which means more often than not, you would iterate on your product decisions. It will mean you will pivot a lot, or at least sometimes, in terms of what you're going to build out. And as that happens, as you achieve your product market fit, that's when you start scaling, and that's when you start jumping, like going to the 1 to 100 sort of a journey. So 0 to 1 is like a world where you are like deeply internalizing the kind of problems you're facing. A lot of times your problems are internal, a lot of times it's the lack of clarity, a lot of times it's also competition. 1 to 100 is more about like, you know what's working and you doubling down on what's working, and then you figuring out some additional growth hacks to get there. So that would be like, to me, the difference between 0 to 1 and 1 to 100. For a firm like Adobe, how frequently is the user persona redefined? Asking because, as you said, PM is the voice of the customer, but when to know that your customer has changed. So number one, it's been only a week at Adobe, so I won't know too much about like how Adobe right now thinks about it. And again, like, this is less about what Adobe and Uber does. Like, those are things maybe more confidential to the respective companies. I am trying to answer these in more general way, but redefining the persona depends again like on the stage of the company, like I said. So if the stage is a more matured stage, you would see that happen a lot less. But having said that, there are examples like for companies like Netflix, which started with selling out DVDs, renting DVDs, to a place where they started building out the content on their own, and then to like a SaaS model that exists out there. So companies at all stages should keep thinking about what is happening in the outside world, and if there are disruptions, and if no matter how matured as a company you are never too big to fail. So you should be conscious about what are the drawbacks of your current solutions, and if there are better solutions out there, you should always be like on a lookout to be better, and keep an eye on them. It would be really helpful if you would participate in
Okay.
Super. Those were all the questions we had. Anything else that anybody wants to talk about?
So first of all, thank you so much, Bhavik. Today's session was an eye-opening session because it had a lot of information that nobody knows about when you actually start out being a PM, right? How does it actually flows? So that specific reason, this session was an eye-opening session. And I'm pretty sure that all the participants are really happy today because they all got their questions answered by you. And while listening to the session, I had some questions of myself, right? So I would love that if you could share your perspective on that as well. So you said that there are situations where you are so heavily invested personally in a product that if your product fails, your entire day is screwed up, right? And if your product is working well, then even if you're having a bad day, you'll have a great day, right? So as a product manager, I feel that as a great product manager, your product should not dictate your mood or how your day has been, because you have other important tasks that you have to work with, right? So how do we detach ourselves from our products at such a level that they create some impact, but they don't dictate our entire mood or day for the entire scene? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it depends on person to person. I think some people say that you should not be emotionally bound to a product, whereas like some feel you won't be super excited if you're not fully invested into the product. Question is fair, like whether it should be to a level that it starts impacting you personally. It doesn't impact, like at least it doesn't, in my experience I haven't seen it impact you to a level where you like get sick and all, right? Like you feel ill but you're not really sick and you're not worse off. But a way to handle that situation, and keeping yourself up, is having a great routine. So whatever that routine is, like whether you like walking, whether you like doing some sort of workout, whether you like listening to music, whether you like talking to your friends, whether you spend more time with your family on your dinner tables, etc. Like make sure you have a routine, make sure you break that down pretty well, because a lot of strength that you get is from that routine that you have. And if you're able to maintain a strong routine, that shouldn't like take you to a place, even if you're emotionally invested, that it affects you too badly. But and if those situations happen, it's like accept that to be a part of the job.
Great. Perfect. Perfect. And I had one more question, Bhavik, and then I think we can wrap up today's session. So it was about the time when you were talking about creating new products, and we are building new products and everything's working fine, right? The numbers are going up. We have the adoption is great. The feedback is great. Everything's working, right? But in the back of your mind, subconsciously, you know that things are not going well. There's some defect in the back that might show up later, right? And if we look at that entire situation, it seems very similar to imposter syndrome, right? Where you feel that you actually know things, but you are always in that fear that one day this sham will be over. So how do we manage that? How do we get it imprinted in our brain that no product will ever be perfect, right? Because as a product manager, our main goal is to create a perfect product, but the inevitable is that there never will be a perfect product. So how do we manage that entire situation?
Yeah, I mean, like you're right that there cannot be like a perfect product, and that's why like keep innovating is what usually is expected out of technology. I think what people tend to do is they overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but they underestimate the impact of technology in the long term. So what you want to do is to manage this well, where you are able to deliver on what's expected, is communication. I think that's one of the strongest skills you should have, and keep improving upon, is your communication ability, which means sometimes it's just about sending like a Slack message to somebody ahead saying that, hey, we were expecting the launch to happen on this date, but we're just running a couple of days behind. And sometimes you don't realize it's as important to that person, and it might not be for a matter of fact. But the fact that you've built that discipline of keeping everybody across of what's expected, and why you were making that decision, and being very objective about it, helps you get through those scenarios. So even if you end up running into the problem, you are dealing with that problem as a team, which means while you are signing off the release, or while you are putting it out to the customers, it's like an agreement between you, your engineering, your business teams, that we are putting it out with, these are the risks that we call out, and if it doesn't work out, or if these risks go up, there's always a choice to roll back. I think that's one beauty of generally the technology products, that in most scenarios they are reversible decisions, and if that happens, then if you've communicated that well, the decisions will come out a lot more stronger. What helps you though is the second part where I said know the map and know the terrain. If you know the map, if you have an analytical twin of your product built out, what helps is that you get those signals a lot ahead in the journey, which means if something is going to break, you might know about that as a signal from data perspective also ahead. So one is your gut, you knowing that hey, this might break, and then that you have a signal coming around which says that hey, this is starting to break, there's a fraud happening, there's a loophole which is getting exploited, etc. And if those things keep happening, you try to plug them as you go along, and that's the way to fix it. It's not always possible to like get signals or have those fixes ahead, and that's why like you would even see sometimes products like Google going down and those things happen. So if those happens, it's more important that as a part of the retro exercise, you understand why that happened and you go back and fix the process. And if you're able to fix the process, uh, at least the same problem should not repeat over and over. And that at least should put an end to those kind of situations. I don't know if that was like exactly the answer that you're looking for, but generally it's like a gray area where you make those calls based on a lot more intuition and some data signals that you tend to get.
Understood. So the data signals are more like your spider sense. They help you before things have happened so that you can probably mitigate the risks that can come in the future. Right.
Yeah.
So with this, I'm done with my questions. And thank you so much, Bhavik, for being here and sharing this immense knowledge with us, right? I'm certain that every participant present in the room has gained a lot of value from today's session. And before ending today's session, I want all the participants in the chat to write your feedback in the chat and thank Bhavik for coming here and sharing his immense knowledge with us. And with this, I'm really looking forward in future if we get any chances to have another wonderful session with you, Bhavik. And it was really wonderful having you. Thank you so much for being here.
For sure. Thanks a lot for having me. It was great chatting and answering all the questions. I loved the way we kept it interactive, and at least we could get to more questions than just the content. So thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bhavik. Have a nice night. And everyone, today was the last session of PM at Scale Bootcamp. And I hope you enjoyed this entire series where we had product managers from the top companies telling their experiences, their knowledge, and their stories share, and making us learn from their experiences so that we don't repeat those mistakes and so that we have a better standoff point when we move into the industry of product management. So thank you so much for attending, everyone. And thank you, Bhavik, for being here and being such a wonderful speaker.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye. Take care.